Most people are gambling because it's a form of escape from reality, from life. And so I think that is a major red flag for anybody. On assessments, we don't typically have gambling questions. So it sort of goes unnoticed, uncovered for a really long time.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Partnership Connections podcast. This podcast is centered around child welfare training and educational topics, all with the goal of helping to support those already working in or with an interest in working in child welfare. My name is Stan Brazier, and I'm the project director for the learning partnership between the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth, and Families, or DCYF, and Rhode Island College. Our desire is to bring information from a variety of experts on a variety of topics, all at no cost to hardworking professionals and others. Today, we'll be discussing gambling disorder. You might not think there is any correlation between gambling disorder and child abuse and neglect or child welfare in general. However, the University of Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling notes that research further recommends parents should be asked about gambling behavior in their assessments of parental challenges and strengths, which may help identify additional ways to intervene in at-risk families, stop ongoing abuse and neglect, and reduce the long-term sequence of maltreatment. So our guest today is Desiree Soto. Desiree is the program director for the gambling-specific treatment program run by the Rhode Island Lottery. She is also a licensed independent clinical social worker. Recognizing the growing impact of gambling addiction, she pursued additional certifications to better serve this population. She earned an international gambling disorder certificate and a gambling endorsement for her professional license, which equipped her with the knowledge and skills to address the unique challenges faced by individuals with gambling disorders. I'd like to note that before we begin, all the views expressed by the guest and hosts do not necessarily reflect those of the agencies or organizations that they represent. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Desiree and our co-host as well, Holly Pacheco from DCYF. It's good to see both of you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Nice to see you. So, Desiree, we take kind of a similar approach with a lot of the podcasts that we do, and we like to have our guests sort of define terms. Would you do us the honor of defining what gambling disorder is and the criteria that's needed to meet the diagnosis of a gambling disorder?
So first, we need to define what gambling is, and that is risking something of value on the outcome of an event when the probability of winning is less than certain. So basically, it's based on chance. It doesn't necessarily have to be only with money, but that is the more popular way to gamble, essentially. But when it comes to gambling, it's very similar to substance use as far as when someone has a gambling disorder. We know this for several different reasons. It is in the DSM, and it is classified under behavioral addictions. Some of the criteria, you need to meet 4 out of the 9 criteria. Some of that criteria includes the need to gamble with increasing amounts of money. You become restless or irritable when you are cutting down or trying to stop. Preoccupied with gambling. Gambles when feeling distressed. Lying is also a big part of gambling disorder, and relies sometimes on others to provide money for desperate financial situations. So, as we hear some of that, it sounds very similar to substance use disorder criteria. So they do sort of go hand in hand. And just like substance use, it becomes a problem when it starts affecting people's lives, whether it be financially, emotionally, and just, it's negative consequences that are associated with that is what indicates it as a problem.
So there's a growing sort of threshold for people, and would you say, you said it's a behavioral disorder, correct?
Yes.
So people's behaviors become out of the ordinary from what they normally are, right?
Yes, it does. There's a serious preoccupation with it. I mean, we call it the silent illness because most people don't really look at gambling as a problem. 95% of the population can gamble how we identify it as gamble responsibly, where They're able to set limits. People just go for fun. Bachelorette parties, birthday parties, and things like that tend to be at casinos. And most people can go play a couple of machines or something and be okay. But there is a small percentage of people, or an increasing percentage, that we are seeing that are struggling with being able to not set limits and spending more money than they should. And most times when people seek treatment, it's already when they're at that rock bottom, so to speak. And it's usually associated when the financial distress is just through the roof. They're about to lose their home, their cars are getting repossessed, stealing from work, those kinds of things. So we see a lot of legal problems with this. And that's usually when someone says, okay, I need to do something about this.
So you just mentioned a few, and I want to ask you about sort of like what the current state of gambling and gambling activities and gambling disorder looks like, specifically in Rhode Island in a second. But before we get to that, I kind of wanted to ask you, from just in your own opinion, not anything based on research or anything like that, but like, what's maybe the biggest red flag or biggest line that gets crossed, or the most common line that gets crossed? Because I guess I come at it from a point of a sort of like naivety, in terms of like, I find it almost head scratching in a way to think about like risking that much money on certain gambling activities or going that far down that rabbit hole. So like, what is in your mind or your opinion that like, what's the biggest red flag or like the most common red flag that you see?
I think mental health plays a huge part in it. Most people are gambling because it's a form of escape from reality, from life. And so I think that is a major red flag for anybody. On assessments, we don't typically have gambling questions. So it sort of goes unnoticed, uncovered for a really long time. And I think because it's so widely accepted and thought of as something fun to do, that people don't associate it as something that could be quote unquote bad or unhealthy. So yeah, I think definitely mental health plays a huge role in it. So anyone with a mental health concern, we should be asking some of these questions, because they are using this as a form to escape from trauma, from depression. It's a way to socialize with people as well. So there's so many different factors that go into it.
Right. And I think also too, the way it affects neurology and that sort of thing, like the continued feeling of winning and getting more and that kind of thing. And then there's that setback, and then there's a little bit more, right? Similar, I think, with substance use and right. So yeah.
Very, very similar. The main difference between gambling disorder and substance use disorder is one is chasing losses, the gambling, and substance use, they're chasing that first high. And so essentially that's what's happening with individuals that have problem gambling, is that first time they win is a huge risk factor. If someone hits big that first time, they're chasing that dopamine rush each time, that first big win. And that usually can set people sort of down that rabbit hole, like you explained. Typically, ages 18 to 35 is the age group that we're most sort of concerned about, because of sports betting, the nature of how you're able to place bets now, where, before it was you watch a game, you bet on who wins or loses, and you find out 3-4 hours later when the game's done. Now you can bet as the game is going. Who might, get a shot now? Who might be taken out of the game at this point? When Taylor Swift was attending the football games with her partner, there was bets on what color she would wear and what lipstick she'd have on. So, it's definitely changed the landscape. The fact that it's so widely available because of technology, that definitely, I think, plays a huge factor in sort of the exacerbation of gambling disorder.
Yeah, what color the Gatorade's going to be that gets dumped on the coach at the end of the game, right? Like
Exactly.
everything. So can you speak a little bit more to that? Like, what's the current sort of evolution of the state of gambling activities? It's so much more widely available now, and particularly in Rhode Island with like, we're not Las Vegas or Atlantic City, obviously, but we have a limited number of casinos, but there's so much available online these days. There's gaming, there's that sort of stuff. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. So even though we are a very tiny state, we have a lot of products compared to other states. We were one of the first ones, I think we were the seventh, if I'm not mistaken, to launch sports betting. And that's what sort of changed gambling behaviors totally. But we have the casinos where you can bet in person on slot machines, table games. We have the sports book, which you can also do in person or online. And last year we launched the iGaming. Well, the Bally's had launched the iGaming. So now you can bet at the casino through your phone, which again, we're not even seeing the surface of what maybe some consequences may be of any of that because, there's very little research surrounding gambling disorder in the United States for the most part. Our research mostly comes from outside of the US when they've already sort of caught on to, okay, gambling is a bit concerning. But we have tons of products from scratch tickets to the Powerball and those sorts of things where not every state has all of these products that we have. To complicate it a little more, we are next to Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, all these other states that also have casinos and different forms of gambling. And so it's as easy as crossing the line to go somewhere different, have a different experience. So that kind of increases the risk. One of the risk factors for developing gambling disorder is proximity to a casino. So the concern that we haven't, again, even scratched the surface of is what's the risk when that is in the palm of your hands, right? We don't have research on that because it's all so new. So I don't think anyone really fully knows or understands what the repercussions are of individuals with problem gambling because it is so new and we don't really have a ton of research to understand the behaviors of it and what happens and that sort of thing.
I think we understand why it's a concern on a larger sense, right? But why should those that are working in child welfare be concerned or consider gambling disorder more with the youth and families, parents, older adults that they might be working with?
I mean, I think there's several reasons. The obvious being when it comes to just emotional development and neglect and those kinds of things, right? Again, similar to substance use disorder, people's lives can be turned upside down with their gambling behavior sometimes. And so it might result or can result in not meeting the basic needs of their children, spending a ton of money where they don't have money for groceries or to pay their rent or to get them to school because their car's been repossessed or something like that. So I think there's a lot of similar consequences and why we should be concerned in child welfare for the well-being of that child. Now, that's again, there's not a ton of research that we have that says, well, this is a direct cause and link to that. This is sort of more just speculation and what we see from substance use disorder because it's so similar to that we kind of parallel them sometimes, and even though they are very similar, they are entirely different, but they do have similar consequences. I know with some of the individuals that I have spoken to, those are some of the issues where I don't have money to pay my rent or I'm about to be evicted and I have a 17-year-old and not really sure what to do. So it's definitely something that can be concerning. I will say that's on the more exaggerated end of the spectrum. That's not the case for every single person. It doesn't mean that if you have a problem gambling that you're going to engage in these behaviors to that extent where it does affect the family. But what some of the research does say is that for every one person struggling with problem gambling, there's at least 10 others that are affected by it. So that's your immediate family, that's your job, that's all those different areas in life because people aren't showing up to work and that sort of a thing. So that could relate or equate to child welfare, right? If a parent is not going to work, they don't have the money they need to be able to support that child and they're using it on gambling, thinking just one more time, just one more win, right? So that they can have the money that they need because some people think that it is just about the money. And if they just hit big and they can fix all their problems with a large amount of money. But the reality of it is even a near miss has the same effect in the brain for people as winning. So it's that constant behavior of just chasing, which can be very distracting as a parent if that's the main focus, right? Is you're just chasing these losses or wins. You're sort of not paying attention to the rest of the stuff going on around you. And again, that's not all the time. Depends on the person and how severe the gambling may be.
That's great. Before I get to the next question, I just kind of have an aside that I'm thinking of while you are naming all of these things. I just think of the age range that you said, 18 to 35, I think. So I think of the young men that we work with, young fathers, maybe even the youth that we work with, and they may be fathers as well. And just in terms of their brains not even developing yet, and that this is so tempting. It's everywhere. It's all over the news now, like all over the TV, all the commercials. Everything is gaming. You can bet now. They give you money to go bet. It sounds like you log on and put in this code and we're going to give you money. I'm like, oh, that sounds great. So because it kind of exploded is what I would, how I would say it, because it just seems everywhere. Especially when I'm watching sports, it's on the commercials, it's everywhere. Is there some kind of campaign or something that is trying to educate as well this population? Is there something that we're trying to, balance out with all of this that's coming at them?
So not necessarily like an annual type of or a constant campaign, but the lottery does have a couple of months of the year that we focus specifically on those groups. So March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. So the Problem Gambling Services, which is through the Rhode Island Lottery, we tend to do a lot of presentations, webinars, and things like that for professionals or for who anyone would like to attend. And then again in September, we have Responsible Gaming Month. And there is where we are teaching people the tools that we have to assist with that. So showing individuals where the time session limits are within the app or at the casino, the self-exclusion, how to do those, how to limit the amount that you're spending and the time that you're spending on these apps. So we do a lot of that type of education in September. We also work closely with some of the colleges. We've had some athletic departments reach out to us, and we've done presentations with a couple of the colleges. Providence College specifically, we've done that a couple of times a year and have actually given presentations to up to at least 100 students just to explain, we're not saying don't bet. We're not saying that it's completely bad, right? It depends, again, on the individual. But what we're saying is, here's the information you need to make an informed decision. If you are going to bet, then know that you can set limits. You can set time limits, financial limits, and being able to really recognize the pattern of your gambling or gaming so that you don't get there. Because again, as mentioned before, most times people are seeking help when they're already at their rock bottom. So the goal is, let's educate people ahead of time so they won't have to get there every single time. So, we have that campaign in September. And then also in December, for the holidays, we have the Gift Responsibly campaign where we're doing something similar. And that one specifically is surrounding not gifting scratch tickets to anyone under 18 because most people do that.
Yes, I've seen that one. And it's so important, I think, with that education piece, just so they can learn that they can set limits around it, because
Yes.
I feel like it's such a slippery slope that someone can just jump on and not be aware of all the limits that they can put on it to better protect themselves, right? So I have another question for you. So what are some questions or assessments that child welfare workers could ask if they might be concerned about someone's gambling habits?
So I think, as in social work and the work that we do, open-ended questions are always going to be better so that we can get more information. But definitely knowing when to ask may be important. We know March Madness, right? There's a lot of games going on. If there's a Super Bowl or something, opening the floor to say, have you ever bet on anything and won any money? have you, or how do you spend your free time, or what's going on? Are you planning on placing any bets on any of these games? Just sort of to open that door if they're not specifically on assessments. Because as mentioned, there's a lot of behavioral health facilities that don't even have gambling questions on the assessment. So if we're not asking, we'll never know. There is the lie bet, which is just 2 questions that can be incorporated into normal conversation or into an assessment, where basically what you're asking is, have you ever had to lie to people who are important to you about how much you're gambling? And have you ever felt the need to bet more and more money? With those 2 questions alone, if they answer yes to either one, then you would proceed with a more in-depth gambling screen, like the problem gambling severity index, which is, I believe, 10 or 12 questions. We have the brief problem gambling screen as well that has a few more questions. And then the one that most people know about is the SOGS, which that's a little longer than the rest. But there's quite a few screening tools that people can use to ask, and they're self-administered. You don't necessarily have to ask it of the person, but it's a good way to at least open the topic. And if someone does say, well, yes, I have gambled, or yes, I do visit casinos, and when I'm there, I can't leave. That's kind of a red flag to say, okay, well, we need to ask some more questions. Let's do one of these brief screenings, or just getting more information about, how often are you going? How much are you spending? That sort of thing.
Great. That's a lot of great information. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Stan.
you mentioned too the correlation with substance use and mental health. So are people with substance use or mental health disorders more prone to gambling disorder?
Yes, there was actually, through our program when it first opened, the problem gambling services opened just before COVID. And just before that, there was one of the, I guess you can call her founders of this, was Nancy Murray. She worked with a couple of individuals where they have a white paper on this, where they went to what used to be known as Discovery House and Victa when they opened, and they surveyed 100, I believe, individuals in one place, and then about 500 between the other locations. And what they found was that individuals with opioid use disorder tend to pick up gambling once they've been free of using substances for quite some time. So there's some correlation there that would be a great research project for someone someday to kind of get into a little bit more. Because again, we don't really have a lot of data on that stuff. But there are individuals who tend to pick up gambling because of their substance use, and then vice versa. There's people who maybe don't have substance use disorder, but in certain casinos, they give you free alcohol as you're playing, and now they've kind of picked up some alcohol abuse or something. So they kind of feed off of each other sometimes, and just like anything else, you put them together and symptoms are exacerbated.
Yeah, I always like to joke that those free drinks are never really free. We had a friend that my wife's whose husband he's I think very responsible, but does gamble pretty frequently, right? It says, he got a free trip through because he has so many casino points. And I said, no, that ain't free. You know how much money he probably had to spend to get that trip at the casino or at whatever it was at resort to get that. So nothing is for free. And I think people kind of get mistaken by that with they think, oh, I got rewarded for this, but it's like they don't often think about all the money I paid and the hours I spent at the blackjack table. And I got all those and all the money I spent at the table to get the quote unquote free drink. Right. So I wanted to also ask, is it more prevalent because of sports betting? Are things more prevalent amongst males than females? Are they at a greater risk for any type of gambling, or are there certain areas where the situation is reversed, where females are more prone?
I would say, in my experience, from what I have seen, gambling disorder doesn't discriminate. It can, happen to anybody, just like substance use or things like that. But I will say that, yes, we do see more males than we do in our treatment facility than we do females. About the men, it's about 70% male population. So it definitely is more prevalent in males, but that doesn't mean that it cannot happen to females either. And again, based on the type of gambling, we don't really have research to know or understand what type of gambling do each gender kind of gravitate towards. Other than the fact that we know with sports betting, yes, that is highly prevalent among young males 18 to 35. And some of that is because some of them are athletes, some of them the competitive nature. So college students are at a fairly high risk of developing gambling disorder, based on their competitive nature, based on the fact that they do play sports. So there's a lot of like competition and things like that that happen in college that do put them at a greater risk. But again, it doesn't mean that they will become or develop a gambling problem. But because younger individuals are risk takers, that's, a risk factor as well for developing a gambling problem.
It just seems so underreported, right? And there's not enough research, and it's similar to substance use, where I feel you would get a lot of information from the family members.
Yes.
Possibly more so than the individual themselves. A lot of shame with it, right?
Tons of shame and guilt. Yeah. So in our treatment program, we do service a lot of family members as well, because, like in substance use, again, I keep referring back to that, but they're so parallel. But we have to meet individuals where they're at. And because, again, with gambling, it's such a socially acceptable behavior for people, and not everyone will have a problem with it, that the family members tend to be the ones to call first and say, hey, so-and-so is gambling a little too much. I really want to get them in treatment. So they'll call the gambling helpline. And what will happen then is, we'll say, have that individual call us. Can't force that individual to call us if they don't want to. So a lot of the times we're dealing with the family member to kind of work them through it, to say, okay, well, here's how you support this person. Here's what you need from us. Let us help you help them, because they're not ready, or they don't look at it like it's a problem. So we do have a lot of parents and spouses in treatment as well, because that's usually the first line of defense. There's a lot of bailouts that happens in gambling disorder. So it's that enabling type behavior as well. So we work with the families on that, saying, how do you do this without enabling the person? You can't come and fix all their problems and pay all this debt for them and think that the problem is fixed. Because that's what families tend to think is, I'll just fix all your credit cards, I'll pay your rent, I'll do this, and everything is fine. But it's not, because the individual is still dealing with the problem gambling symptoms. They're still very much preoccupied with this. They're still very much going after that loss. And the families can't understand, why does this keep happening? So we provide the education to them to kind of help with the process a little bit.
Yeah, it's so important. You have to treat the whole family.
Yes, definitely.
One question, just to kind of go back to the conversation we were having around sort of the marketing of all of this, right? And I think it's similar to what you see with alcohol, and in terms of like, here's 29 seconds of the commercial promoting alcohol and how fun it is and how great it is, and then the 1 second of please drink responsibly. And I think I've seen it's just some similar, right? I think here's FanDuel and DraftKings and how great everything is, and like Holly was saying, we're going to give you your first $100 free, or we're going to give you your, all you have to do is, if one person makes one foul shot, you're going to win money. Like, right? Like the easiest thing. It's like, how could you not? You almost stupid for not coming, doing this, right? And then at the end, it's like, oh, by the way, you should call 1-800-GAMBLER. But what is sort of unique about what is happening with Rhode Island and the Rhode Island Lottery and the work that you do? What are some of the services that the problem gambling services actually through Rhode Island Lottery that you offer that people might not know about?
So I will say, what makes us different from other states is the lottery, my position in the lottery for the problem gambling program and responsible gaming. We're the only state that has this position embedded within the lottery. So that alone makes us unique. Positions like mine tend to be in behavioral health facilities or the councils. So we have the Rhode Island Council on Problem Gambling that we work a lot with them as well, and getting messages out there, PSAs and things like that. The lottery is very supportive and really wants to help individuals with problem gambling. I know people like to, say negative things about that sometimes, but they are very supportive and know that, there's a small handful of people that do have problems that we want to be able to help. So the problem gambling services was developed through the Rhode Island Lottery, and essentially how we identify it is it's a hub and spoke. So someone calls the problem gambling helpline, they meet with someone, they kind of do a small mini assessment, see what's going on, see what the issue is. And then that call typically gets transferred to myself or one of the 17 providers that we have all throughout the state. And then that individual, based on if they want telehealth, if they want in-person, if they prefer female, male, peer services or actual counseling and therapy, that determines who they get assigned to. So our providers are, again, all throughout Rhode Island, so we can try and get as many areas as we possibly can. That individual would be referred to them. We'll do an assessment, sort of like a biopsychosocial assessment, get a full history and picture, and then they will meet with those individuals to do individual counseling and or peer counseling as well. So those are some of the services we have. We work with Silva Spirit Farm, which is in Tiverton, and they do equine therapy, as does Bridgemark. We work with them as well. So we have some contracts with them, with East Bay Community Health and Elwyn, which was formerly Fellowship Health Resources. We work with those agencies to send referrals to them so individuals can get a full treatment for anything, mental health, substance use, and in addition, the gambling. You do have to have the gambling endorsement on your professional license in order to treat individuals through the problem gambling services. So the Rhode Island Council on Problem Gambling has a training academy where it's all self-paced. It's all PDF files of lessons with homework assignments attached to it. It costs $275. And once those 15 weeks of sessions are complete, then the individual can apply through the Rhode Island Certification Board to become an individual who can treat gambling disorder. They'll have that on their license. They can work with us or through their own agencies, however they'd like to work with it, and be able to provide that counseling and therapy to individuals.
That's great. I think that shows great ownership and like shared responsibility on the part of the Rhode Island Lottery, right? That like not only, yes, we want to, promote this, but we also realize our part in preventing problem gambling. Are there specific, is there research around like what are the most effective forms of treatment? And is medication an option?
So that's still being studied. There are some medications that have been linked to being able to assist with like the cravings of gambling disorder, but it's nothing set in stone or official. If I'm not mistaken, there's a Parkinson's medication that tends to work with someone with gambling disorder, as does, I want to say naltrexone. I could be wrong, but I know there is another medication, but it's nothing that's like proven per se that actually works. But there are some, and they still are being studied to see if those medications can actually help with cravings and urges of gambling. But really, what seems to, in my experience, work the most is the peer support, individuals with lived experience. But that's one of the struggles within many programs right now is there's not a lot of people who have this experience who want to be able to, or who can or want to do this work. It does take a lot out of someone, just as it does with a substance use disorder, right? To have that lived experience and kind of help someone through. We do have peers within our program that can help, but we don't have enough. It depends on the age demographic. There's a lot of the younger individuals that want peers, but they want someone more in their age range. And that's not something that is very easy to find right now. So that's something else that we're trying to work on and really increase the peer support. So if we know that there have been individuals in our program who haven't gambled in 5-10 years and they want to give back, that's something that they're able to do to just sort of, walk beside that person and show them the rope, so to speak, of what it's like to be on the other side.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, I was thinking back to what you were saying near the beginning about it being sort of a silent illness. And I can imagine there's still probably, even if you're in recovery from gambling disorder, there's maybe still a lot of stigma that you have or a lot of shame and guilt that you might have. And so it might be hard I would imagine it might be hard for someone to kind of get to that point where Yes, I want to
Exactly.
revisit my old life by helping somebody else out. I can imagine that could be challenging.
Very challenging. And one thing that I think is, and why this is so important to pay attention to, kind of bringing it back to what you said with child welfare and just overall society in general. With gambling disorder, the suicide rates are double that of addiction, which is huge. And many people don't talk about that because that's still something, again, that's being researched and trying to really understand. But what we do know is that the suicide rates are higher among this population. So, that's something that definitely warrants attention.
Right. No, for sure. Um, a final question for me is just what's your personal interest? Why are you so interested in working with this population and working with those that have gambling disorder?
So when I first started this, I knew nothing about gambling disorder. My longtime mentor, Nancy Murray, who also helped develop this program, showed me the ropes and explained it all to me. And the more I worked with it, the more I realized there aren't many people who can help in this area. And there's so many people that are going to need help in the near future. And we need people to learn about it now, understand it now, so that when the problem erupts, if it ever erupts in 5, 10, 20 years, we have people who are experienced to be able to say, okay, this is what we know, this is what we need to do. Because right now, there aren't many people who are even aware that it can be this severe of a problem. So, learning about it, the more I learned about it, the more passionate I became about it, the more I want to learn about it, the more can of worms that opens too, because, video games is another form of gambling for youth, which can be very scary, which we know even less about that than we do with adults in gambling right now. So, just really having this as a social worker, understanding it's our duty to kind of figure this out and do it now before it gets too bad where we can help people, because we don't want to help. I mean, we want to help everyone, right? But we don't want to help someone when it's at just rock bottom. We want to be able to say and see the signs and say, okay, well, here's what we can do. And let's give you the support that you need now. Let's show you all these things, So part of when we do some of these campaigns, like I mentioned, was talking about limits and things like that, is because we want to not deter people from gambling, but we want them to understand, here's how you can do it safely so that you don't get jammed up later, because no one knows if it could happen to them or not, So most people are taking a chance just by playing. You don't know how much you may like it or it may grab you. Each individual is different. So I think definitely just having that understanding of there's not a ton of people out there who know or understand this, and it's important to be able to kind of combat it now. And there's tons of stakeholders in this. There's many states that have their council on problem gamblings, and we meet with some of them monthly, some of them are quarterly, and we all come together, all the New England states, and just kind of share what's going on in our states and figure out together, well, how do we combat this as the whole Northeast together? Because it's a huge problem for a lot of for a small amount of people, but a deep enough problem that it again, it warrants attention.
Sure. And like you said too, it's a problem that kind of is in the shadows a little bit for people, but that it's becoming more and more, so much more easily accessible and so much more available. It's becoming easier and easier and easier. I'm like, what's the harm? And I'm gonna throw down a $5, but then it's just like, do I want to lose that $5 or $10 or $50? And then it's just sort of like most people, I think, are able to set those healthy limits and boundaries. But there's that percentage it could snowball and become really, really a crisis for them or bad for them. So
exactly. And we don't know what may be the precipitating events that put people at, an even higher risk to develop a gambling problem. Because again, we talked about the comorbidity and co-occurring disorders and how closely related they can be and how they kind of both feed on each other too. So, it's not to, again, deter people or scare people to say that, oh my God, if you gamble, you're going to have a problem, because that's not the case. There's many people who can have a drink and not become an alcoholic and not have an alcohol problem, right? So it's the same thing with gambling, it depends on so many other factors, what happens or how that individual ends up having a gambling problem.
Right. Is there anything that you would recommend? I know I said that was my last question, but I'll ask one more, I guess.
Yeah.
In terms of working with kids, is there anything or a way to sort of navigate a conversation if a social worker has a strong sense that the parent is having an issue to talk to kids about gambling?
I mean, definitely, I think, again, just opening the conversation, simple things like, if you're thinking from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, are you without food? Are you without these kinds of things, right? Is there some level of maybe neglect going on so that we have a better understanding? And not even just from the parent perspective, right? But even asking that individual. I mean, think about it. Growing up at 5 years old, people say, I bet you can't race me to do this, right? And we don't even know, we don't even understand the gratitude of what we're saying, right? It's just like, hey, I bet you this, I bet you that, right? So I think just being able to there's no cookie cutter way to have those conversations when it comes to kids and gambling. With kids, I think really just digging. Do you play video games? Do you ever bet? I mean, something even like when they do raffles, that's a form of gambling. Raffling, and not kind of exposing people as much to those things, or at least, again, giving them the information that they need to know that this is a red flag or could potentially lead to other things. But that's sort of a hard question for me, mainly because I don't typically work with children. So that's like a touchy-feely subject to be able to have those conversations. And I would say I'm probably not the most qualified to. But, just asking those usual questions. What does your family do on their free time? Do you ever go without anything? The normal questions that you would ask someone if you were just concerned about their overall well-being, I think would be important.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a matter of just trying to start that education. And it's like same thing with substances, right? I think we're seeing more. You're just trying to start earlier and earlier and earlier when it comes to substances, vaping, etc. That we're just It seems like we want to try to get people younger, just so that there's a level of awareness that's raised, at least, right, for kids and families, even if they are younger, just to let them know, like you meant. I think that's a good example of like, I bet you can't do this. And then, it's just, do you understand what that means? It doesn't necessarily have to be money. It could be something that you exchange or whatever. You're taking a chance on something that's not certain. Going back to the definition of gambling in the beginning, right? Like maybe teaching kids some of those lessons right from the outset, that like you understand what this means. If you are betting on something, you probably don't have a very good chance of winning. So, yeah.
Even just with the gaming too, it's you might not think of it as gambling, but you're getting points or you're getting something, and so you're playing to get more of that, right?
Yes.
So even though you're not betting, technically, it's still
exactly
feeling that need, getting more, right?
It is. I mean, you hear it sometimes on the radio or on television, where you'll hear someone say, my child who's 8 years old racked up $30,000 on my credit card buying skins. And most people don't know what that means. What's a skin? And you're getting this avatar that is like a blind box sort of thing, right? When even those blind bags that they have in stores where you get a new, what's that thing called that everyone's obsessed about right now? Those Labubus or something. They're like these blind bags that you get of this little stuffed animal keychain kind of a thing, where that essentially can be considered gambling, because you are getting something that you don't know what you're getting. You're risking a chance and you're getting some random thing, and you're going to keep trying until you get the one that you want. That is the pure definition right there of gambling. So it's something that I think is sort of embedded in like everyday life, that again, it's just sort of normal, essentially, for lack of a better word, for people, right? Until it's not, and it starts affecting people negatively.
Yeah. I learned something, right? I didn't know that. I have no idea what that was until just now. So thank you for that. Holly, do you have any other questions?
I don't think any more questions. I just wanted to say, Desiree, thank you for the work you do. It's so important. And I think like you said, we need more of it. So much is happening right now. And
yes,
I don't know where we're headed with a lot of this. So Yeah, I appreciate you.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you guys for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Desiree. We appreciate you taking the time today. And we will put some resources in the show notes. And feel free to reach out. Is it okay if I put like your contact information in our episode description and show notes as well?
Yeah, you can put the email or the work phone number or even
Awesome.
the our direct line to reach our program. I'll just tell you the number is 401-499-2472. That is essentially our sort of like our gambling helpline. So if someone calls the gambling helpline, it gets transferred to that number and then we deal with it.
And anyone can call. You don't have to be you could just be a concerned individual, concerned family member, friend.
Yes, it can be just a concerned person. It can be someone who's seeking treatment. It can be someone who just has a question about, do I have a problem with gambling? How would I know? And or if anyone wants us to come and do presentations for their facilities as well. We sort of do gambling 101, problem gambling 101.
All right. Awesome. Desiree, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate you guys.
Bye-bye.